Hey, what's up YouTube? I'm back again. So question to evaluate the conflict resolution skills that we use to negotiate the development of the lyrics and the production of the song. So you might think, oh, there was no conflict or there was heaps of conflict depending on what goes on. Obviously I'm making this before we do the actual activity. Just broadly about conflict, think about all groups. Talk about young people. There's bound to be some conflict, whether it be small or large. I guess on one extreme is, very overt and extensive bullying in a group. Could be certainly an issue, and really need some good facilitation skills to work through and manage that as a youth worker. Then I spoke about in the previous video about task focus and maintenance focus. So the task is, what are we going to do? In our case, our task was to make the song. Maintenance focus, is everyone okay? So how do we manage that task maintenance focus in our group? Well, we're saying we want everyone to contribute, and we want everyone to contribute at their best. But if if your absolute best is coming up with a few words, so be it. But we'd still expect you to work with tons in coming up with trying to flesh them out into a sentence or a verse or some sort of lyric. Other people might be really high-level muso or writer and bash out stuff, high-level, high-quality, deep-thinking lyrics. And we know everyone's somewhere in between those two spectrums, and we want to include everyone in this process, regardless of your ability or your confidence or what you think your ability is. So we're coming from that perspective of strengths. Everyone can contribute to this, we believe, looking at people's strengths and supporting people to contribute. Or in looking at conflict, I guess there's two broad approaches perhaps. It could be avoiding conflict or negotiating. So certainly avoiding conflict, I'll let you think about what happens there. It's like the elephant in the room if it's not dealt with. Starting at the basics, the group agreements and where we set up the boundaries of what's okay is a starting point. But some sort of conflict comes up. And let's say in our example, it could be minor around, I guess there's views on the world, what's right, what's wrong, and within our group there could be divergent, some different views around, what are the underlying causes of social issues? Is it all an individual's problem or an individual's fault, or is it more conflict theory approach where people are impacted upon by things that are largely out of their control or unknown to them in many senses? I might be trying to write a lyric suggesting that people don't have a lot of choice, and you might be coming more from a perspective saying that if individual choice that leads to social issues. So can we, I guess an example for us around that is, can we communicate around that? Can we include both viewpoints? I would suggest that we can. Is that something, as an example, is that the sort of thing that might come up in your group process? And I'm sure there are ways we can include those both as a facilitator. You need to say, is there a particular viewpoint on what's wrong with the world that was going too far and it's ethically or morally or legally we can't go down that path? For example, someone called Adolf Hitler might have suggested that what's wrong with the world is the Jewish people. You might think, well, that's just ludicrous that I'd even say that, but it just popped into my head. I think there's been stuff going on in America as I speak that I guess certain viewpoints around from the white supremacist viewpoint of the world has been spoken about of late. So I guess some things you might think you don't need to say, or it's absurd that anyone would think like that. But however, maybe not so absurd that it's absurd that it's there perhaps, but it does exist. Viewpoints, really divergent viewpoints do exist, and there's nothing to say that you could be working in a group where there's divergent groups like that. So you need to work out a way of negotiating those sort of viewpoints. How do you include or exclude, for example? So someone doesn't feel in our process that they're getting their ability to have their say, and for whatever reason, if they're being shut down, perhaps the next point saying if the values are being tested. So as I spoke about, if values are too outrageously biased or unethical, then we'd be looking at not including those, so that would lead to conflict. Assumptions are made. So I guess if I just assume that we're all on the same wavelength in this process, making that assumption that could lead to conflict. So I've got to have that scope for, within that sociological view of the world, there's the functionalist view to the conflict view and everything in between. So providing we're not, stepping over laws about inclusion or social inclusion based on gender, race, culture, religion, we should be able to free to express a range of views, that as long as it's not discriminatory language. But if someone's got minimal knowledge, then that could be an issue. So if someone's talking about stuff as fact and this is how it is, and yet the real facts might suggest that what someone is saying is not correct. Let's give an example. Knowledge is minimal. So what do we know about Aboriginal Australia at the moment? I guess what I'm hearing is that there are statues in Hyde Park. This is current debate that says, Captain Cook discovered this place in 1788 or whatever the year was. The word discovered Australia. Now, from another perspective, you might say, well, hang on, he didn't discover Australia. There were people here and they'd been here for 70,000 years or perhaps more. So I guess Aboriginal people will say, I disagree with the idea that Cook discovered Australia. There were people here. Which position is true? Which position is using real fact? So I guess if knowledge is minimal, is there going to be a conflict there? Or depending on your view of the world. I'm sure I would have conflict if I was talking to certain conservative politicians about this view. There would be certainly, I believe, certain conservative politicians in this country would say we must have Cook's statue in Hyde Park and we must not change the way that it's written. And I could say, well, the evidence would suggest that the way it's written is actually inaccurate. So shouldn't we talk about whether there's an alternative, more true representation of fact that could go there? So I'm sure we could have dialogue, though. We may agree to disagree in the end, but we could still have that dialogue. Other things that could cause conflict in a group if the expectations are too high in the group. So have we set the expectations too high that we can create the song in one session? Well, maybe let's wait and see. But we did put in some strategies in advance. We've been exploring lyrics and writing lyrics and asking you to come prepared. We're also getting an expert in to help us with the process in tons. So let's just hope we've got that balance right. As I said, time will tell. If the expectations are too low, is the task too easy? Is it boring? So, some young people disengage perhaps from groups or school when they find everything too easy and they get bored. Other things that could cause conflict in groups is cultural differences. We had Barius talking to us last week, or it was actually this week, but Barius said, in his words, he thought all English people he didn't like any English people until he'd met Bill. So the idea is that you can have these preconceived ideas, cultural ideas, and Barius probably had good reason to believe that. The other side of that, me as a white person, if I just relied on media to get my information, I might suggest all African people are in gangs and then drug lords and out to stab me with a machete. So what's truth? Cultural difference. Personality, as I said, some people may be more loud or outgoing, some people quiet and reserved, so there can be personality differences. Gender imbalance, gender difference, so the way I see the world as a man versus how women see the world. I guess being largely a patriarchal society, Australia in the past, particularly when I grew up, going to school 70s, 80s, much more patriarchal perhaps than it is now. Well, certainly my family was patriarchal, put it that way. So male privilege did exist in my experience of the world. So if I take that into working with women, then that could very well be an issue. So how do you reach these, how do you work through and come to a consensus in conflict, negotiating conflict or conflict resolution? So you want to get there logically, discuss the things logically, should the wording on Captain Cook's statue in Hyde Park be changed? Let's try and go through that logically. But maybe there has to be a compromise. So the theory would suggest you avoid a win-lose. So is there something, some sort of middle ground? Do we have to have an outright winner? Can both sides give a little and compromise? But do avoid voting and flipping a coin to come to a consensus. Ideally, a consensus in some sort of disagreement is worked through verbally and through talking, not through flipping a coin, drawing something out of a hat, because there's a win-lose there. you've got to come in with the attitude that holding different views is natural and healthy. And I guess if there's a conflict, both parties are going to view that they're correct and that they're right. So as a facilitator, I need to say, yeah, both parties view that they're actually correct, and maybe they're both correct in some ways. So that's that. There's got to be some negotiation there to get to some sort of win-win or compromise, not a win-lose. So what the theory suggests is that if everyone can be included, in the initial agreement, and that initial agreement is dynamic, that's a good thing. Get both sides to get in negotiating to come up with some sort of concession early, that's good. But if you, as a facilitator, if you've got some sort of rapport and mutual trust with you and whoever you're negotiating with, that's a good thing. Requires deep listening and reflecting, cooperation and shared leadership in power. And a strategy that might work with leading with young people, if you're a mediator in between two opposing viewpoints, if it came to that, then maybe you get the young people to sit with you and they talk to you, you talk, take the information and relay it to the other party, and then they respond to you. So you take a real mediatory role to get away from that attacking the other person, so that I'm right, you're wrong. So if you can take the information, try and make sure you've got a clear understanding, using those communication skills, reflecting back, and then relaying the info. Then I guess what you're after as that mediator is that some sort of compromise from both sides, some sort of giving ground in some way, and then some sort of resolution that both sides have got some sort of needs met. But it's an ongoing process. Small concessions early. I guess that's a snapshot in the conflict resolution. Ultimately, in summary, I reckon communication, good listening skills, reflecting skills, empathy is important. Empathy is really important. Negotiation, mediation skills. As I said, you could be like the adjudicator in the middle, taking the information and deciphering it, interpreting it, and relaying it on to the other person. So, with everyone in the room, but just to get away from that attacking and keep the conversation moving and flowing. So good skills as a mediator. So just have a think about what skills that were used in our process. So it talks about evaluate the conflict resolution skills used. Definitely knowledge of diversity would be one for sure. Okay, that's a long video.
Freedom from fear, I'll never be the same. Never be the same. Never be the same. Freedom from fear, I'll never be the same. Like a bird I will fly, the sun I will rise. No matter what they say, I'll never be the same. Joy from my heart, peace from my mind. Freedom from fear, I'll never be the same.